On this episode of Rock School Proprietor Podcast, I'm sharing my hot take on an episode from another podcast that got me thinking about practice and retention. Here's the controversial question. Are we actually encouraging families to quit lessons when we tell them their kids need to practice more? Because if a student loves coming to lessons but isn't practicing at home, maybe practice isn't actually the issue. Maybe we need to better understand a student's purpose for taking music lessons in the first place. Stay tuned. If you're a guitar instructor and you've used one of the dozen or so popular method books, you've probably noticed that gap between what's in the books and what students actually want to learn. Most guitar students want to play their favorite songs, and that means strumming, chord changes, timing. If that stuff is even in those method books, it's usually way in the back. I put together the exercises in Complete Guitar Strumming to cover the foundational concepts that all guitar students need, but in a practical way that applies to their goals, which is playing their favorite songs. For instructors, the book comes with an instructor companion guide that walks you through best practices for teaching. I even have training videos that I've used with my own staff that you can access as well. The guide and the videos are free for anyone who wants to use the book for teaching. If you want to get really deep and understand the origins of the book, you can go listen to episode 50 of this podcast or just head over to rockschoolproprietor.com/book for all the details. Welcome to Rock School Proprietor Podcast. My name is John Kazicki, and Mandy York is not joining me today. I'm going to be doing something a little bit different, which is a hot take of sorts, or a reaction video, or maybe Stitch Incoming, as I see on Instagram. I was listening to Dave Simon's podcast this morning. I'm a big fan of Dave's podcast. If you haven't checked out Dave's podcast, Music Lessons in Marketing, definitely recommend it for other studio owners and music instructors. I consider Dave a friend. I've gotten his permission to talk about this, but the episode that Dave released that I was listening to was episode 268, called The 3 Metrics Parents Use to Define Music Lesson Success. I'm going to play a quick clip of that episode and then give you my reaction and my thoughts to what Dave said.
So that scorecard, it boils down to 3 invisible metrics that I like to call the 3 Ps of music lessons. And those 3 Ps are pleasure, practice, and progress. Pleasure, as in, is my child simply enjoying this experience? Practice, not just whether they are or they aren't practicing, but the question that parents have is my child practicing out of pressure that I'm applying to them? Are they practicing because of pleasure, because they enjoy it? And the 3rd P, progress. Can parents see the progress that their child's making? Or simply, are they making progress at all?
So there you go. Dave lays out the 3 Ps that he calls it, of the metrics that parents use to determine success in music lessons. So what is Dave saying? In short, Dave's saying that parents are assessing the value or willingness to pay for music lessons based on these 3 metrics that he's laying out: pleasure, practice, and progress. So Dave is suggesting that parents are asking themselves, is my child having fun? Is my child practicing? And is my child making progress? Now, obviously, Dave goes into more detail in the episode, and definitely recommend you listen to it. But those are 3 pretty compelling questions, I think, and valid. He makes some good points. What I'm going to propose, though, is that we look at a 4th P, purpose. Okay, and I think purpose is important for us to examine first, and probably more for us to understand, because we're the experts when it comes to music lessons. And oftentimes parents and students are looking to us for guidance and for understanding. Dave even says in his podcast that parents aren't musicians for the most part. He's talking about practice, and parents don't necessarily know how to help kids when it comes to practice, kind of liking it to homework. But anyway, to piggyback on that a little bit more, purpose. What is the purpose for the kids to be in music lessons? Why are the parents interested in having their kids in music lessons? Why is the kid interested in getting music lessons? I think it's really important to examine that question, because it might make a difference in how we weight those other 3 Ps: pleasure, practice, and progress. So quick story, my son is on a bowling team, and this past weekend, I was watching him bowl, and he was not bowling as well this week, nor in the past few weeks, as he has been in previous years. And I started thinking to myself, like, wow, he doesn't seem to even want to get better. I'll give him advice. He doesn't want to take it. Now, granted, when we're talking about bowling, I'm paying about $50 a month for my son to be on this bowling team. So maybe you could make the argument that stakes are a little bit lower when it comes to bowling versus music lessons. But I started wondering, man, should I even keep him in this? He doesn't seem interested in getting better. So that's progress, right? That when Dave talks about those 3 Ps. He certainly doesn't practice. He doesn't go to the bowling alley between his bowling days, which are every Saturday. So he's not practicing. So on those 2 counts, those things are negatives, right? He's not practicing. He's not making much progress. And I even thought, well, should I even have him in bowling? And then I looked and saw, like, well, he's having a lot of fun. He's really enjoying it. So on that pleasure metric, it's super high, even though the practice and progress metrics are really low. So in the end, I thought, well, yeah, I'm going to keep him in it. He seems to love it. He seems to enjoy it. So here's my take on that as it relates to music lessons. If we understand both the student and the parent's purpose for taking music lessons, then we have a better chance of success with those other 3 Ps. And here's what I mean. Is the purpose, for instance, of a kid taking music lessons because maybe they want a better part in a musical? If that's the case, then yeah, maybe progress becomes an important metric of those 3 Ps. Maybe that becomes more important than even the child having fun, because maybe what they're doing is they're pursuing these private music lessons so that the kid sees more progress, and then they're able to get better parts in the music. That's where the pleasure metric is going to skyrocket. They're having more fun in their productions because they're getting better parts. Now, conversely, maybe we've got a student who is taking music lessons because the parent's looking for their kid to make friends. Their parents looking for their kid to find something that they feel connected to. And maybe they tried sports, but they weren't into team sports. So they thought, well, music would be a good option. In that case, pleasure may become a more important metric to that kid and the family than any of the other 2 Ps, which are practice and progress. So we, as the providers, I think that's important for us to know, because then we can look at that and we can say, well, pleasure is more important than practice. So let's place an emphasis on the pleasure that the student is getting out of this experience as opposed to practice or progress. Practice. Let's talk a little bit more about that. Dave spent a lot of this episode talking about practice. And that's something that he and I are both very passionate about. And we actually had a long discussion about practice on the podcast previously. That's episode 29 of this podcast where Dave came on. We talked, it's called Revisiting the Practice Problem. The practice problem is a term that Dave coined because he's recognized this for years and years, if not longer, that practice is a pain point for both students and parents when it comes to music lessons. And I'd argue it's probably, or it might be, a pain point for instructors too. Now, here's my take on practice, though, and I'm going to take a slightly different approach than Dave took in the episode that he released. I'm going to pose the question, are we encouraging students and families to quit when we say things like, if you want to improve, then you really need to spend 20 minutes each day practicing? Or are we perpetuating this pain point by doing things like assigning practice as homework? Now, I'm certainly not saying that you don't have to practice. But what I am suggesting is that sometimes what we say, whether that's overtly or subtly, is encouraging this practice metric as being more important than maybe it necessarily needs to be, depending on the student, depending on the family, and depending on what the purpose is. Like, why are they in music lessons? So going back to that idea of the student who maybe wants to get better parts in the school musical. Well, yeah, practice might become more important there in order to see those changes. If we have students who are pursuing music in higher education, yes, of course, practice is going to be more important. But if our studio has a large percentage of students and parents that view pleasure as the most important metric, are we actually giving them a reason to quit lessons by telling them you should be practicing more? So near the end of the episode, Dave posed the questions: how are we helping parents see progress? How are we making practice easier to understand at home? I think those are valid questions to contemplate and to maybe come up with answers. But I don't necessarily think that those are the solution to this problem of retention where students are quitting because parents say, well, they're just not practicing, especially in cases, and we've heard this a lot, when parents say something like, man, they really love coming here for lessons, but at home, they're just not practicing. So in those cases, I think if you haven't had conversations with the parents to understand what their purpose is in lessons, then it's worth having that conversation. It's worth digging in a little bit deeper, because otherwise, again, parents aren't musicians. They may just be under the assumption that practice is part of music lessons, and if my kid is not practicing, well, that means it's not working and it's not worth the money. Maybe they'd just rather see their kid have a deeper connection to music. Maybe they'd rather see their kid just find other people who like music and they can have some sort of community and conversations with others by understanding music in a deeper way. Maybe the idea of progress and having them practice at home is not that important, kind of like the approach I'm taking with my son when it comes to bowling. I don't care if he's practicing. I don't care if he's making any sort of progress or improving. If he's enjoying the activity, well, then that's enough for me. Then that first metric, which is pleasure, is most important. And that's why I'm going to keep him in the activity. So a couple more resources. We did a couple other episodes of this podcast. Let's see, episode 30, an inside look at why parents pull kids from music lessons. That's an interesting one because I actually spoke with a friend of mine, and I retell the story, a friend of mine socially who had his kid in music lessons, and he was telling me why he took the kid out of guitar lessons. And then episode number 4, what counts as practice, redefining practice in music lessons. That's a great one that speaks to my argument in this instance, because Mandy and I go really deep into ways to measure maybe more creatively, what counts as practice as opposed to logging hours. So that's a really great one. We even have some resources on the website that you can visit. So I'm going to wrap this quick hot take episode of Rock School Proprietor podcast up, and we'll see you next time. If you have topic suggestions or questions, please contact us at info@rockschoolproprietor.com. We'd love to hear from you and hear suggestions for future shows. We've put together some free resources for teachers and studio owners over at rockschoolproprietor.com and a private Facebook group called The Modern Music School. Please join us over there. On social, I'm at rock.school.proprietor on Instagram and John Kazicki on both LinkedIn and Blue Sky. Your ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify are always appreciated. And if you enjoyed the show and gain insight from our conversation, then we count that as a win. All we ask in return is that you pay it forward, and please share the show with someone you think needs to hear it.